Welcome. Today we have a very exciting topic, business transformation, a guide to stay differentiated with Juniper networks. This is another part in our webinar series on transformation management. Already we've covered solutions that matter with SDN and NFV available online. Today's focus is business transformation. And we're very excited to go through with you the journey that service providers are going to transform their business to generate business outcomes. Followed on, we'll have technology transformation, the organization of the future, and how to measure business impact with virtualization. I'd like to take a moment here to introduce our presenters for today. I'm your host, Wayne Chung, Director of Product Marketing here at Juniper. As well, we have David Nogerbal, Vertical Marketing with Juniper. He's been engaged with service providers globally with service creation workshops. As well, James Winspear, Solutions Consultant Director as part of our professional services organization. And he's been deeply involved with helping our customers transform as they go through this journey with SDN and NFV. We have a very exciting agenda today for you on business transformation. Lots of rich dialogue and insightful experiences from our industry experts. First, we'll start with the changing landscape. What's going on in our service provider environment that's driving this change? Next, the business consultant for virtualization. What's the methodology and role that we play? Followed by service creation advisory. This is the beginning point of most journeys on business transformation. Then, the NFV Business Transformation Framework. What's the overall approach end-to-end to change your business? Lastly, we'll provide insightful experiences and observations from our NFV projects. And with that, we'll hand it over to David.
Oh, thank you, Wayne, for letting us join into this interesting conversation today. Yeah, I'll be now talking about the changing landscape that we see in telecom operators. Just keep in mind, this is an industry that's been here for, in some cases, over 100 years sometimes. So we can expect that the landscape has been changing along the time. And I want to describe the impact that virtualization will have in that period. As any industry, what we see is that what is important is to keep the differentiation, but also to keep the relevance in front of the customers. A long time ago, we saw an age of telecom operators where connectivity was king. Couldn't talk about the connection age. What is relevant here is to have a connection, to be able to make a phone call, or to have a wireless connection, to have a 4G, to have your phone, your mobile, or your fixed, or your TV. Connectivity was the important thing. Over time, we saw that people started to pay more attention on the capacity. How am I connected? Is it slow or is it fast? Can I run the applications I care about? What services do I get? So that age, we describe it as the capacity age. It's not been a long time ago still where we were talking on those terms, capacity. But now what we see is that we're moving to the next age. And here is where telecom operators, in order to show relevance, they cannot talk about connectivity only. They cannot talk about capacity only, which is important, of course. But the most important thing for the consumer and for the enterprise will be the experience they get when they have access to those applications that now sit mostly in the cloud, or they need a type of connectivity to get across those applications. Therefore, the experience on using those applications will be important. And here's where this is a new challenging time for telecom operators to make sure that they provide the right experience that matters for each individual application. Obviously, in every one of the different ages that we have just described, there are multiple competitive factors out there. In the past, probably, the more competitive factors were other telecom operators that were addressing similar targets, similar users that they could provide connectivity or capacity to. This is where we talk about the other telcos competing on pricing, maybe on managing those rising costs, the spectrum constraints, the lack of traction from their customers. Nowadays, and more often now when we talk about the apps and content age, the non-telcos competitive threats are growing. We see that other companies, that they don't have to deal with any of the telecom complexities. They just use the over-the-top technologies to get through and connect also the same type of customers. We talk about the death of pay TV. So pay TV, of course, is still alive and very alive, especially for premium content, but this can come from any player. It's not the cable or the telecom operator any longer. It could be anyone. We see also that more and more other operators or other type of companies will have access to unlicensed or lightly licensed spectrum to offer their connectivity and services, so they can again bypass the telco services. And in this period of time, we also saw that exponential growth of users. Obviously, the population keeps on growing. We keep on connecting new geographies, but also now it's not only important to connect each house or each family. We talk about each family member and maybe connecting them multiple times because they are managing multiple devices. So you see that we move from the subscriber to the user, and therefore this will generate a new experience and new expectations to them. A fair question to ask is, how will the telecom operator of the future look like? This is a very difficult question to answer. And I think there is no single answer that can describe that, because probably every telecom operator will adopt their own strategy to evolve to the future. Let's analyze here multiple scenarios that we believe that will happen. Obviously, each scenario will give them a different competitive landscape and maybe more chances for differentiation. But also, each of the plays that we're going to show now will show them the amount of transformation they need to do in their own organization in order to achieve that. So let's start with the play one. We believe that there will be still operators and telecom operators that will be playing as a utility telco. There's a space and there'll be a market for that. There's a need as well. Obviously, someone will have an asset that many can benefit. It could be an access company that they only have this access being wireless or being a fiber access that they want to share multiple ISPs. Could be an international, maybe a transoceanic fiber. So that business is probably low differentiated. There's status quo. Differentiation will be, oh, I connect this neighborhood, or I have this specific cable under 2 continents. That's the latency I can give. So that's the differentiation. It's still an option, but probably here we'll see that the cost will be the only major differentiation. Therefore, managing those costs will be extremely important. We will expect very specific and narrow run or companies that can survive as a utility. Is that a place you want to be? It depends, right? The type of business you want to do. But you need to make sure, really, that you can differentiate yourself if you play here. Probably play two, which requires a lot more transformation from where you are today or where the industry is today. We see that, we call it the smart pipe, or play two. Basically here, we see that it's a company that it's not only focused on building their own access networks or their own networks, maybe even using third-party networks from other utility or play one telcos. But the important thing here will be that they are now looking into provide specific value to those third-party companies that will be using them, exposing APIs, maybe even sharing billing or OSS systems. Facilitate that business, that transaction. Understanding you're not fulfilling 100% of your customer needs because your customer cares about experience. The experience is defined by applications that you don't probably run. So you want to make sure that the people running the applications, they'll have a smooth utilization of your assets. So that's what we define as a smart pipe. Again, it defines transformation. The reason of that it's required, that transformation, is because that new softwareization through APIs, exposing them, making them secure, but making also a business out of it. Let's define play number 3, where we believe that probably there'll be a lot more interest. Here's where probably the transformation cycle that's required is huge. It's much bigger. Those are operators that they might be looking at an end-to-end service provider, trying to satisfy 100% of the needs of these end users, maybe with their own applications or maybe using that ecosystem. really it is about creating ecosystems. It's developing as much as you can, but everything else will be an ecosystem. It's really hard today that a single company can provide all the value to that end user. Therefore, those partnerships will be important. So we see that some of them will have networks. That some of them will also obviously have to implement those APIs to manage those third parties, but they will be able now to manage end-to-end that experience. The important thing or the interesting thing of Play 3 and next generation telcos is that we will see new companies that are appearing, and they are pure players, Player 3 or Play 3. They only do this next-gen telco. They don't even own a network. They only run over third parties. As long as the user is connected somewhere, they can offer them services. So we see how competition is opening when we try to compete at that level. So what we see then is that each telecom operator will now have to make their strategic decision, strategic plan to define which play they want to run in that market, in the industry. Do they want to be a utility company? Do they want to be a company who provides an end-to-end service? What structure, what skills, how their structure and organization should look like. So what we see is that there are different things that are evolving over time. There's here a simplification of 4 different departments that can be impacted by this transformation. What we see is that the CTO, that traditionally has been focused on those network operations, the future responsibility looks more about a future focus, defining the technology of the future, defining the platform that will support the future services without having to make new decisions all over the time for every new service that comes. The CIO group, what we see is that traditionally is looking just at the backhaul applications of the company. What we see is that they are becoming more operational focused. A lot of the services, of the new services, are originated into the data centers, into the IT platforms. Therefore, it's very important the way those are operated to provide the interactivity to the customers through end-user customer portals, the BSS connection. Customers will be activating and deactivating new services. Therefore, this integration is important. Analytics, big data. So there is a lot to do into that operational world of IT now. The CMO is also evolving. What we see is that today they're looking more about the customer touch points and see how they can approach the customer and sell what they have into their portfolio. But this portfolio now in the future needs to evolve in order to be more oriented in 100% of the needs for that end user. They need to come and satisfy those needs with a lot of new services. Someone needs to provide those inputs and feed the organization back from what they hear into the market. The CMO's role now becomes more on defining and develop those new solutions, improve that customer experience, and evolve the brand to support those new products that they are going to offer. The CFO, traditionally looking at financials. No difference here, but obviously they'll be more performance focused. If you are operating a portfolio of 5, 6 services, and now we evolve to a portfolio of 50 to 60 services, every one of those investment decisions needs to be analyzed and look at the performance of those decisions. Each investment needs to be profitable, but by sharing platforms that the CTO defines, by sharing IT platforms that the CIO defines, by looking at the right market segments that the CMO defines, the CFO can now make more educated decisions here. So what we see here is that the areas of focus will evolve. The business importance of each of those decisions changes, and what we see is that the different stakeholders of the telecom operator will be looking slightly different on every one of those different decisions that they are making.
David, that was really insightful on how organizations are making these rapid business decisions. James, a question for you, if you don't mind. You work with our Juniper customers globally. What are some of your observations in the shift of responsibilities?
I think, as David said, it's pretty clear that whilst the evolution perhaps from connection age towards that Play 2 was oriented towards a difference in product, and then perhaps a difference in software and systems. The new age that we're all going through at the moment, that the industry has started several years ago, is evolving, and no one C-suite, no one group, no one team has all the answers. And what we're doing with our customers is taking those inputs into our normal business transformation process, evolving that process to make sure it adapts and is appropriate for the virtualized world, and continuously feeding back and learning from those service providers and addressing all of the evolving requirements from the different groups, and making sure that we actually act as some of the glue that binds together those decisions by the different groups, so that we help those service providers understand within the service provider the different requirements, the different, sometimes competing ideas. And as we go through that life cycle with a service provider, not just help that service provider evolve their thinking between their teams themselves, but also taking into account the industry focus, the evolution of standards, of products, but also the ecosystem as it develops. So we'll talk in a little bit more detail later on, but that evolutionary process of the C-suite is incredibly important to the service provider, and we recognize that, and we work with those different teams in order to help feed back and influence, and also get the results that each of those teams want themselves.
So let me introduce now a new figure that Juniper is offering to the market, to its customers, and this is the business consultant for virtualization. We understand that virtualization is introducing a lot of new technologies, methodologies, organizational changes, etc. Therefore, we believe that as a vendor that we are actively playing in that space, in virtualization, we can give also some guidance into driving that transformation more efficiently. Every day there are hundreds of articles and blogs and social media tweets, etc., that talks about the transformation of the network through virtualization. But probably there is less information about how virtualization transforms the economics of networking. At the beginning of virtualization, probably there were some big promises, and you'll be saving a lot by moving to the virtualized wall. In the same way that the IT was expecting a lot of savings by moving to virtualized server environments. So what we see is that capital savings or CapEx savings, OpEx savings, it's something that still remains. But probably now that the industry has the experience, probably it has evolved also the perception of what is expected in each of those. So the reality and what we see in the different customer engagements is that SDN and NFV introduces capital efficiency, mostly because it introduces variable costs. What we see is that the demand and that demand estimation, that sometimes is not easy to do, may, in the traditional world, it translates sometimes into unnecessary investments because we never get to what it was predicted. Right? So with virtualization, it can adapt or it can match much closer to those predictions because you don't have to invest everything in day one. You can turn on new services much faster. Therefore, virtualization helps here. Also, we see that traditionally you have to provision on peak for your services that maybe it's reach the peak once a week or once a day or once a month. You need to keep that peak all the time in the traditional model. In virtualization, you can make it more variable. And also the overhead for every service is quite high today. We see in some extreme services that the network is purpose-built for one specific service. The overhead that we see in virtualized world on the infrastructure is much lower. We see that a pool of servers can run a variety of different services. So what we see is that the overhead then is much lower. So we see that business impact on increased ROI, lower business risk. When you start a new service, you don't need to make that upfront investment day one. You can invest as you see that the uptake of the service is there. You see that the market is accepting this, and you can make the corrections over time. You can even decide to kill the service if it doesn't perform, and you haven't lost that much. This is how we are reducing risk. The second part is probably more known, and it's more about the operational efficiency. Those are the OPEX savings. Mostly, they come mostly from the introduction of automation. And what we see is that the time it takes to deliver or deploy a new service, the time it takes to provision in a new service, also the service assurance, the amount of automation that is brought there. What we see here is that the quote to cash cycle is reduced a lot. Therefore, revenues are coming faster, and also the cost of generating those revenues are much lower. Finally, and probably the most exciting part, is service agility. Here is where virtualization with automation and with the right infrastructure provides this new engine for service creation. The reality is that with the same amount of infrastructure, you can deliver more services. You can expand the portfolio much faster to match and go to new markets. Also, not limited into your network. So service providers, operators, telecom operators are offering and reaching out to customers that are not directly connected to them. And also, it moves from that static business model to a business model that now it's more dynamic. So it's a profitable growth. It's reduced churn. It also provides this improved customer experience that we talked at the beginning. In my conversations with telecom operators, one of the biggest concerns they have is that some of the cash cows of the services they have in the portfolio today, they aren't performing that well. Especially when we look at the business services, we see that one of those services that nowadays is generating a lot of their revenue and margins is Layer 2 and Layer 3 VPN services. The business is still good and stable, but we see that it doesn't provide new growth. And in some markets, it's starting to show some levels of decline. Therefore, there is the need to come with new services. Same way that in the past we migrated or we evolved from the TDM-centric business to IP-centric business, now we need to start adding into that. The market has plenty of options. We have managed security, we have IoT, SD-WAN, we have other SP cloud services. The opportunity is out there, but now it's about making the right choice on which services you want to launch, but also making the right choice on which infrastructure you're going to put in place and which teams will be running those infrastructures. Having a platform investment will facilitate and help that type of infrastructure, because then in a very flexible environment, very open platform, a telecom operator will be able to launch many new services today and in the future. So one of the first steps in service creation is looking at the market needs. What can I provide the market that it solves a specific problem? When we look at the different segments, each segment will have different and specific things. So what we see is that maybe as a big picture, we can look at the enterprise trends, at the consumer trends, this globalization, this need for security, IoT playing different roles, the big data to generate new revenues or generate better knowledge of the end customers. Those are needs that are out there. So telecom services need to evolve to offer that. But it's not just a matter of providing a new list of services. It's also a way of serving the market differently. We see that the end user expects those services anytime, anywhere, into any device. They expect actually the services being user-defined. The service that I use has to be slightly different from my neighbor. The service that a company uses needs to be slightly different from a different company because they have slightly different needs. On demand, pay-per-use, those will be the new go-to-market models that they expect. They'll pay only for what they use. They don't want to pay for anything else, actually. And they expect an improved experience. They don't want that finger pointing anymore. The application doesn't work, doesn't perform well. Is it my ISP? Is it my carrier? Is it my cloud provider? The experience needs to be great end-to-end. And this is the challenge to serve those new customer expectations. So there is a say that basically says a problem well-defined is half solved. And this is really what is in mind of our business consultants. So when we have those customer engagements, really what we try is to provide that relevance and competitiveness to the customers. We've seen that infrastructure optimization and capital optimization, it's very important. And really that efficiency that brings the new type of infrastructure by using NFV and SDN will provide ultimately that business goal, provide that efficiency. Making it easier to upgrade, to change, and to introduce new services and the new needs. Also, the OpEx reduction is top of mind, and this is another very important part of that business consultant engagement. If I introduce automation, how much will I save in engineers, for example, or time of our engineers? Because I need those engineers to focus on something else, in creating new services nowadays. I cannot keep them on doing manual stuff. So we see that there is a transition that generates new needs. And again here it's important to quantify those savings before making the investment on automation, for example, or in new tools like SDN, or in new methodologies like DevOps. Finally, we have a lot of engagements that it's about revenue growth. Hey, Juniper, can you help me to grow my revenue by bringing new services into the market? I want those services to be relevant. I want those services to come really fast into the market. I cannot go through all the cycle of multiple months or even years until I have the service out there. So understanding my services today, understanding my strategic decisions I just made, I need to know a roadmap of services I can launch and continue serving my customers. Keep the relevance, but also keep the competitiveness out there into the market.
David, if I may inject with another question. Now, these three pillars seem so critical to measuring our customers' impact. Now, taking a look at a solution that we just covered on a previous webinar on cloud CPE, it repeatedly shows itself as our #1 use case for NFV. Help us understand, how does this approach apply to virtualizing enterprise services into the cloud?
Well, absolutely, and this is a very key question, because a lot of our engagement, they really go and define one of the first pieces they want to do in the transformation is virtualizing the customer premise equipment. The equipment that is there and defines the service today, the equipment that is there and defines the service, that is very static because it's a physical equipment that cannot be changed over time. Therefore, here we see already by that definition that the capital efficiency is not there. You make an investment that is really related to a service that cannot evolve over time because it's hard-coded into that equipment. With virtualization, we see that those investments are changing. You can still upsell new services to that customer without having to change anything. Cloud CPE remains the same. It's about activating new licenses or moving maybe a new VNF, a virtual network function that will deliver that new service, and activating a license that it's paid only at the time that is needed by this customer, not before, not after. So we see that this is managing more efficiently that capital. In OpEx reduction, obviously there is a lot more of automation that can be delivered. What we see is that turning on a new cloud CPE customer or any user on cloud CPE, when we compare it to physical CPE, it's a fraction of its time. There are no track rolls. It's the moment the customer is asking for the connection, and as long as the customer receives the equipment and he can get some sort of connection, can be wireless, that it's instant, or can be some available wireline connection, the service is set up, and that service can evolve over time with no manual intervention. Everything is pushed from the customer portal directly through the orchestrator into that system. Therefore, no manual, fast, and really user-defined. So again, here we see that OpEx reduction plus the customer experience. When we talk about revenue growth, those customers that we've been serving for pure connectivity in play 1 or play 2, now we see that obviously they have other needs. They might need security, they might need unified communications, they might need WAN acceleration or access to a specific cloud service with a specific performance or QoS. So they can go and enable a paid service that will only deliver that particular thing they believe they need. But this incremental gradual investment that this customer is making, this is generating that additional revenue. The perception they have of the operator also changes, and they see that now the operator through that portal keeps on offering me new stuff, new things that are easy to configure. I can even try it. I can test it. I don't pay until the end of the month if that's the decision they make. But you see that this is really defining a new experience and a new way to get those services much closer to the cloud wall than the traditional telco. And this is ultimately that business transformation that we described. So growing revenues should generate profitable growth. And that profitable growth may come from different angles. Any industry, when we talk about growth, we can probably look at this matrix, and it's looking at growing with existing services into existing markets, maybe by improving those services, by making them more competitiveness. Maybe bundling, maybe offering, reducing the churn by doing some minor changes, etc. So existing services to existing market, there is still road to follow. By the introduction of virtualization, that we see is that in many cases they say, oh, I offer managed security. I will now offer virtual managed security. So it's exactly the same service to the same customer, maybe with a better margin, more dynamic. So we see that that's the play in that quadrant here. But there is an opportunity for existing services, and with virtualization, to offer them into new markets. Maybe a market you're not serving because it's too expensive to sell to. A case that comes to mind always is, oh, we don't offer expensive or sophisticated services, let's say, to SMBs, the small and medium enterprises, because they are too expensive and there's a lot of manual configuration, they don't have the expertise. But we see that with virtualization, we can reduce the price point because it's heavily automated. We can apply some specific templates, and then you can implement them. So you see with an existing service, but a new technology, you are getting into a new market, SME, that it wasn't served. So you have the skills, but now you are offering them differently. So you expand to the new markets with existing services. There is another play, and this is probably the most interesting one, but probably it's also the most challenging one. And it's, okay, let's come with a new set of services that I want to offer to my existing customers. The easiest thing, probably the lowest cost is normally to go and upsell to existing customers that you already have a relationship with. And here is offering more choice. I know that my customer is buying connectivity. He might be interested in security too. Let's see if I can create a service that I can attract that existing customer. Maybe that my customer already has security and connectivity, but I know that he's going into that particular cloud provider, buying a lot of stuff. What if I establish a relationship with the cloud provider and I resell the cloud service as part of my VPN and security envelope, for example? So we see that there is opportunity to grow to existing customers by knowing their preference, etc., and keeping and bringing those new services generated internally or through partnership. But also new services can attract new markets that maybe we don't serve. Before I had this example of SMEs, but now let's move on a more radical example and say, okay, how can I sell to a customer that is not served by me today because I don't have a network to reach them? Maybe they are in a different city or maybe in a different country where I don't have a network. But using the over-the-top technologies and maybe specific alliances if they are needed, now I can serve them using virtualization. I can go and offer a service over the top through a portal using a network that someone else is putting in place. Probably the SLA might not be exactly the same that it's when it's in my network, but as long as it's clear enough with that end user and I provide value and relevance, will be good. So again, what we see is that new services with virtualization can be offered also now into new services to provide that profitable growth that is promised. Okay, so all this brings us now to this section that it's really talking about the service creation advisory that Juniper brings into their customers. So what is the service creation advisory? So it really is a team that Juniper puts in play and really will work very closely with the team from the telecom operator in order to accelerate all the process to bring a new service into the market, a new service that it's mostly built on virtualization. It needs to go through the different stages, but also it needs to look across the multiple aspects of it that Juniper can help. So we can look at the business case modeling and see, hey, what is this new service, and what market will be attracting, what is the opportunity out there, and create all that business case modeling that Juniper can help and facilitate. With experience with being done it for over 30 customers now worldwide, we can accelerate that process and bring a lot of insights. There's also the service creation. Some of our customers, they're still not clear on what are the different things they can do with virtualization, what are maybe the first services they can start experimenting with. So here is what it can come with. Service creation will help to define the strategy of the company, identify those services, and then again move into this business case modeling and bring it to market. There is a third part here that is really important. I mean, our customers, they know very well Juniper because of that. We help them through the design and architecture. That's probably the most technical part. Juniper offers that and still offers that, of course, but probably what you have to see here is that we are providing all that envelope that probably our customers don't know us very well for that, but really we can help across the cycle. But the design architecture on the platform and infrastructure that is needed to bring those services, it's important. And the last one is about the OSS. What changes do I need to do in OSS? But also, what are the different process assessments? I want to automate. Where do I start? Which tools I use? Which team is in charge? So we see that all those things need to be discussed, and this is the last part that we are showing into that diagram. So let me give you now a couple of examples of those engagements. So I picked the service creation program to start with, and what we see here is that inside, for those customers that we are engaging with into that specific program, we see that we go through that journey, and really we are accelerating the steps to go through that journey. Identify the market opportunity, identify the new service, understand which portfolio you have, how this can evolve, which services can be replaced or evolved with virtualization, what services can I add to provide that relevance. Then there is the justify part, and justify will be more about the business case. Okay, that's a great service. I see there is a need for the market, but can I provide it realistically? What investments do I need to make? How much can I charge the customer? What is the ROI? Is there ROI? Does it fit on my strategy? Was just to maybe reduce the churn, or was it to generate additional margin? So those questions need to be answered here. And by doing that model, we can answer those questions. But then it's a time to develop a service that's been identified and justified. It means that it will be more about, okay, let's see what infrastructure I need, which team needs to put it in place, how will I price it, which segments, what pricing, what bundling do I decide, what is the support model, what SLAs do I offer to the customers. So really goes much deeper into the definition of the service, and also much deeper in understanding what it needs to be done. At the launch, we normally get into a situation, into a place where we normally have to answer questions more about, okay, do I have the sales process in place? Do I need to train the sales, maybe add new partners? How about the marketing? Analyst relationships, press relationships. Maybe we can do a joint press release with the customer and announce that new service that is coming. So we see that at the launch is a very important moment to make everyone know that all this process is now available, makes it available for everyone. And finally, then there is the demand generation piece, which really is very customer focused. And the reality is that every customer will define, I mean, every one of the telecom operators will tell Juniper whether they need help here or not. Maybe that press release that we did, maybe we can follow up with a co-branded service, or maybe Juniper stays away, or maybe gives some specific support on generating demand. But the reality is that this evolution from identify to generate demand, what we see is that at the beginning is Juniper will have a lot more involvement. Probably towards the end of this process, Juniper has less involvement. But the process is important. It's not a new process. It's a process that telecom operators know very well, and Juniper, what it does is accelerates it, helps them to go through that with the experience that we generated and with engagements with our customers. So a second example of all the different engagements models that Juniper is offering is about the business case modeling that I mentioned before. And here is more about being able to quantify the business impact. Again, business impact can be defined in many different ways. Some people is interested in the ROI, but normally people will be maybe looking at the P&L, the cost delivery, so maybe comparison. What if I do it with physical infrastructure or with virtual? So how do they compare in CapEx, in OpEx, in time to market? Also, some customers are looking at, okay, how about I start with virtualization, but then over time when I see that maybe I need capacity and maybe the agility and this risk mitigation is not as important, but performance will be more important, then I move to physical. Can Juniper tell me at what exact moment, in order to provide this infrastructure optimization, what exact point do I need to transition from virtual to physical, or maybe from physical to virtual again? So with those complex models, we can come and provide guidance here. Also, the promise of automation that we have made along the cycle. So it's where does it come from? Is it in the service fulfillment? Is it more important in the event response? What is the impact of having a self-care portal? What is the impact of having customer configuration versus a manual? So what we see is that all those questions, ultimately, there is an assumption that can be made, but ultimately people need to measure it. And here is where it's not only measured, but quantified in order to make a more again, a more educated decision through the process. It's not about technology, it's about the business impact. So Wayne, I will hand it over to you now to guide our customers through this transformation framework.
Thank you, David, on those incredible insights in terms of the business impacts and overall what the journey for business transformation looks like. Now we're going to hand this over to James, who will share with us those customer experiences that he's seen in terms of business transformation. And James, over to you.
Well, thank you, Wayne. And I'm going to talk about our experiences in Juniper Services of delivering projects to customers around the business transformation framework that we've used for a number of years, and that we have adopted, and continuously evolve and improve for the delivery of NFV solutions. So here is an overview of a typical framework that we use for the NFV business transformation. And it's really a presentation to talk about and to present the kind of questions we get asked, by who, and how we deal with those questions, and how we go through the life cycle to understand the different owners, stakeholders, and groups that feed the requirements in, that goes through the design, and then we help implement the solution to achieve the overall business goals. So effectively, we provide those advisory services with the CTO, CIO, CFO, CMO that David's just been talking about, with the use of service creation, advisory services, and other engagements that really addresses those benefits and the objectives and goals. And then we go through typically assessments that digs down and thinks through how do we go about translating those business goals into networking, into infrastructure, to systems and to software requirements. And really that process is a logical process. This is derived from the business transformation that we've been helping our customers go through for many, many years, but has been adapted and adopted the NFV framework in order to understand what we need to do in order to deliver against those NFV goals set out at the beginning in those advisory services. So as we go through the assessments and we quickly move into implementation and through integration and then adoption services, we end up delivering a successful networking infrastructure, systems infrastructure, but does that really address the business goals? Because we set out at the beginning to achieve a business problem. And if we just deploy networking, or if we just deploy systems, which is the largest focus for a lot of the people that we work with and we engage with, then it's a great technology play, but it doesn't address those business goals and isn't really a transformation. So the reason why we have this framework is to understand all the stakeholders from the beginning, and as we talked about earlier, to work with those different stakeholders, ensure that we as a solution provider understand those different teams, the different ideas, work with the service provider to evolve those ideas through this life cycle and through this framework. And more importantly, as Juniper, with a large amount of customer-facing experience in NFV over the last couple of years, we continuously feed back with inside Juniper, and we learn in an anonymous way the best practices and the best processes to help shape that transformation that is still unique to each customer, but that feeds back from the lessons learned within Juniper and across the industry. And as we go through that framework towards the end of that life cycle, yes, we may well be involved in how are those network systems and processes adopted, and then into life cycle services where in life we would want to help add more VNFs, add more physical network integration, but also evolve and change those solutions as the networks, as the systems, as the industry keeps evolving. And of course, OSS, BSS and IT integration, really important to move beyond the initial plays and trials into full-scale deployments and solutions. So here's an example using Cloud CPE, covering vCPE, UCPE or hybrid CPE, of how we might do that transformation framework with our customers. And it shows a clear sequence, because we have many Gantt charts, because we have many projects, from left to right, going through advisory services, the assessment services, and then often leading into field trials from which we learn, from which customers learn, and then going through the full production implementation services for design, deployment, and customization. And as I suggested previously, that then leads on to full-scale production, going live, ready for service. But after that, we and the service provider cannot just easily launch a service and walk away and think that that addresses the business problem. The business problem needs the original goals and requirements to be met, and those often aren't met with the day that you go live. The day that you go live, you start at zero. You have zero services. You then need to add more customers, and the adoption process is really important to make sure that the systems and the process are understood by operations, by product management, and as those services evolve and those understandings develop, the product management team can add more virtual network functions, can add more services, and that's where we get also involved in the VNF lifecycle to enable operations, product management, to add more VNFs, to validate those VNFs, to onboard them, and to develop those, in this case, cloud CPE services further. In addition there, systems integration is shown as one block at the tail end of the life cycle. And this is a very simple diagram to show what can have many phases, many iterations, and many operators that which we'll talk about shortly have gone through that learning curve already, and we've helped service providers go through that life cycle ourselves. We've learned from it, and we're helping other service providers go through that same life cycle ourselves. And every service provider wants to and tends to have its own unique approach, its own goals, its own set of requirements. And that's why we would like to be involved in all of those stages so that the end goals are actually achieved. So now we're just going to go through a few observations that we've had from the lessons that we've learned from the last 2 years or so of being involved in all sorts of POCs, of demos, of trials, of production implementation, of lessons that we've learned with those early adopter service providers, and provide a bit of a commentary on where we see the benefits, the challenges, and also to provide that feedback so that as other service providers want to take on the journey into the NFV world, that we can all share as an industry, with an open platform, a way of moving forward and progressing towards our real end users, those customers of our service providers who will benefit from this move towards a virtualized world. So over the last several years, there really have been a number of very high-profile service providers who have been innovative, who have been early adopters, and who have, over the last few years, challenged the industry with the move towards a virtualized world, have contributed to the original white paper, I think, more than 4 years ago now, in 2012, and who have pushed the vendors like ourselves and the systems integrators and the solution providers like ourselves towards network function virtualization. So those innovators have both learned the lessons themselves and have also changed a number of their systems and their approaches. And as David was saying earlier, some of the advantages and goals, such as pure cost reduction, have been identified as being a great objective, but service agility and time to market have been understood as a more realistic goal of NFV. So that cycle of innovation has already occurred, and now those very early adopters are really moving into the more mainstream adopters. So that technology adoption curve that many of us probably have seen and understand, we have been through, and we're effectively bridging that chasm right now, moving into 2016, into the real majority adoption of NFV trials and NFV deployments with a majority of service providers. Another area that we've seen, both historically and more recently with NFV, are around the contrasting approaches in service providers between the best of breed or component-based approach, where the service provider wants to pick and choose every single instance or element of that classical ETSI NFV architecture from a different vendor. And there may be some very good reasons for that service provider why that has a lot of benefit, might be strategic relationships, might be competitive plays, for a number of reasons. And there are a number of very highly visible service providers who want to go down that best-of-breed component-based approach. And as we'll hear from some of the references later on, we're definitely involved in providing components into that overall solution. But equally, we have a lot of service providers who recognize the value of taking a solution from a service provider and solution provider like Juniper and taking most of those elements together, which are pre-integrated and have an open framework, to address the challenge of ETSI NFV orchestration through MANO, through the VNFs and through the VNF management solution, and take it from one solution provider that still is multi-vendor, has an open infrastructure and an open intention towards the market rather than a closed market. Another area that we've seen very clearly is the trials that we've been involved in and that our customers, service providers, have been driving. There's been many different types of trials, whether it be trials that address the technology challenge, that look at the customer demand, which may be a little bit early, but those also look at the processes. And I think the major observation that I would have is that you've got to set out the objectives clearly of those trials and not just to do a trial for trial's sake without understanding what those objectives are that you're trying to test. Because there's a lot of lessons that each service provider learns from those, but if you don't set out to achieve them in the right way, then they can be just a stepping stone which doesn't address all of the stakeholders' interests. But those are the sort of early adopter and solutions and component-based approaches and trials which we see going on in the market at the moment. As I think many people understand, the evolution towards NFV is not just a networking solution, it's not just a systems transition, and it's not just people or process. It really does encompass all of those components, and to walk through that life cycle of taking on and gaining real benefits from NFV. There's a lot of fears, doubt, and there's a lot of trust that needs to be embodied in those vendors and providers who help service providers along that journey. And that's why we at Juniper really want to try and address those fears from the beginning. We are 20 years old now, and we've helped an awful lot of service providers move from the connection-oriented age towards the IP age. And over the last few years, we've gained a lot of experience of delivering, using this framework, the transition from that pure IP and service-oriented age towards this virtualization age. And we know that we benefit the most through our service provider customers when they benefit from the ecosystem and openness of different partners and multi-vendor relationships. And as Juniper, we recognize that we have a part to play in the overall ecosystem, but more importantly, we don't want to close that ecosystem off. Our benefit as Juniper is to enable that ecosystem and to deliver what we're best at, and to allow other partners to bring their P&Fs into the solution, even if it appears to be a competitive play. Of personal and particular interest to myself with an OSS and IT systems integration background is the fear that NFV requires a completely new NFV OSS. And that simply isn't true. This isn't so complex and so difficult that you cannot make the NFV evolution without a complete replacement for your OSS. Each service provider has a different challenge, no doubt, but it's more important to understand the evolutionary path, the adoption of NFV as a solution means and has an impact upon your OSS, BSS and IT, both in terms of systems but also in terms of processes and people. And it really can be seen as an opportunity to improve the existing systems, to integrate with them, and to encourage them, or sometimes force those systems to be upgraded, to evolve, or to be replaced in component process. But as Juniper, we recognize that the industry moved a long, long time ago away from a tied relationship from network vendor to also delivering the associated OSS, BSS and IT systems purely for that network solution. So our solutions enable and encourage integration with whichever OSS, BSS and IT systems need to be there, and we will help those service providers understand the complexity of the networking solution and through the orchestration system that we have, but provide open APIs which can be consumed and integrated by any of those existing or new OSS and BSS systems. And as we've talked about a number of times, NFV is not a single or static solution, and the industry, the standards, the technologies and the momentum continues to evolve. But as I said earlier, we do believe, and you can see very clearly, that leading service providers have crossed that chasm into the majority adoption state. But those lessons learned from different service providers, from the industry, continue to feed back. And that's certainly something that we help our service provider customers understand. Although each service provider has to go on its own journey, we provide that feedback, and some of that feedback can be adapted, can be adopted, and it is anonymized, of course, but it is that best practice approach, so that as more and more service providers adopt NFV, we see the best practice technology, the solutions, the integration patterns, and we make it more effective, more efficient for those service providers following to go through that NFV evolution quicker without the cost, time and efficiency challenges that the early adopters may have had. So just some summary observations that we have, how various different service providers have gone through that life cycle over the last 2 years of many different technology trials and have now moved into production deployments. And whilst the NFV industry is still evolving, as I said earlier, and still maturing, and there is still further feedback and change going on, really those service providers have started launching production deployments, and we're starting to see the first indications of that feedback loop going back into the CFOs and the CTOs, which then equally meets their goals and objectives and achieves their original goals. But as the industry has moved on, additional goals, requirements and complexities are understood. And so we're seeing that solution adoption evolving, and more importantly, as a vendor, we're seeing and learning and feeding that back into our solutions and to how we do things. So whilst it could be seen to still be early days in that NFV adoption, there are many service providers in production, and the challenge for a lot of the newer service providers just addressing that jump into the NFV challenge is how to jump in. And the one thing that I would recommend is that whilst newer service providers may be more agile, can be more disruptive and can be innovative, there still needs to be the sequential logic of thinking through the key stakeholders' requirements, the technology requirements, and then before you even jump straight into production, some element of trials to understand the processes and the implications for systems integration. But new service providers can learn the lessons from existing trials, from existing production deployments, and we help service providers along that life cycle so that the newer projects are half as long to implement NFV as they were 6 months or even a year ago, and can go quicker into production without the challenges and risks that we maybe had as an industry 1 or 2 years ago. And the last point there really is about, as we said from the beginning, understanding what the business objectives are, what the strategy objectives were. And without understanding those from the beginning, you can't then identify how you succeeded against those and where you have room to improve. So really, addressing all of those services and that logic that David talked about initially and that I've talked about in terms of the sequence of events is really important, but it's important to start to innovate fast, to learn from that experience and to evolve and to address what will be a very compelling and competitive environment between service providers that do address this and gain competitive advantage. And we're there to provide some of that experience and to solve those business problems with you. Thank you. I'll now hand back over to Wayne.
James, thanks for sharing those experiences that you've had with customers that are engaging with this business transformation. With that, I'm going to cover some additional customer feedback that we've been hearing with some of the market leaders that are taking NFV and embracing that with changing their business processes and ultimately business outcomes. AT&T is a great example. They've been working with Juniper on 2 applications, specifically Network as a Service as well as the AT&T Integrated Cloud. And with this, they're really looking to transform their business in the way that they're delivering services to market faster and addressing their customer pain points more effectively. Second is around OBS with their EasyGo service, which is all about virtualizing CPE services and bringing them into the cloud. Again, to address business pain points with greater velocity of delivering new services to market. And as a net result of both of these customers really looking for that business outcome and going through that business transformation. With that, I'd like to close on a couple key takeaways. Now, Juniper has really been working in this transformation with our customers for many years now. We're a leader in network and cloud innovation. We've proven that through years of experience and results. We've been an influencer in every aspect of the IP network, seen many transformations along this journey from TDM to IP, now into NFV. We've developed virtualization capabilities across all our platforms, whether that be in routing or security with virtual MX and virtual SRX to deliver the most carrier-grade and scalable platform in the market. We've been an innovator around SDN and NFV technologies demonstrated with our Contrail platform. And lastly, around this business transformation, a trusted business partner to help you enable growth and transform your business going into the future. We've called out several things through James's insight on customers and David's approach on business transformation. Taking the next step around any of these aspects that we've covered in this webinar really leads us to the Juniper Network Service Creation Advisory Service. There's a data sheet that you can access on our .NET page that will cover the next steps around the service creation process, and that really is the key next step to engagement around business transformation. This brings us to the conclusion of our webinar today on business transformation with Juniper Networks. I'd like to take this time to thank David Nogerbau and James Winspear, experts in this industry on business transformation, and with sharing their insights with us. I'd like to also invite you for our webinar next time on technology transformation with NFV. In the meantime, please visit us at juniper.net/bignfvidea for more information. Thank you very much for